Hello, friends of the podcast, and welcome to Directionally Correct, a people intelligence podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Sasha Arjannikova, Director of Analytics Business Partnering at Adobe. In this episode, we will cover how to build a people analytics function that genuinely partners with the business,
bringing the stuff that people analytics team works on back to the business, and
how to earn the trust as a data SME and make your insights drive decisions. How do you navigate the subject matter expertise part of it? How Sasha went from herding cows and modeling on TV to becoming one of the most people-centered analytics leaders in the industry. You've been kind of famous in your own right, correct? You were on TV in the past, weren't you?
A little bit.
And now, let's get down to business. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. This podcast is dedicated to you to help democratize people intelligence for the world of work. If you're looking to support the podcast, please make sure to listen weekly, subscribe to the Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, sign up for the Data Driven HR Academy at datadrivenhracademy.com, purchase Cole's book, People Analytics, or check out everything else at colenapper.com. Before we get into it, a quick word about HR Bench, the company powering this podcast. You know, when we all started in people analytics, we wanted to do strategic work, building predictive models, workforce planning, advising the C-suite, and most of all, quantifying the impact for the business. Instead, we spend months building dashboards and reports that should already exist. HR Bench eliminates that entire phase. Your HRIS connects, your metrics calculate, your benchmarks populate. This is not novel. This is day one, not quarter two. That means skipping straight to prescriptive analysis, storytelling, and taking action for the business. Want to learn more? Book a demo at hrbench.com/directionallycorrect. Find out more about the company powering this podcast and building the future of people intelligence. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. Well, Sasha, we've known each other for a minute now, right? Yeah. It's been fun to see your career kind of blossom. I saw you doing some work with the HR Strategy Forum. Can you tell me about that? What is it, and how did it come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the board of HR Strategy Forum. It's a nonprofit professional association that's been around for about 30 years. It's all volunteer-led. And what really got me excited is the opportunity to create something that doesn't currently exist. So a lot of practitioners today in HR and people analytics just across the board are trying to figure out what is happening, how we respond, how do we get ahead. And so really this opportunity to bring together peers from different companies, bring together academics, practitioners to figure out how we answer the questions that are emerging. And so it's been a pleasure working with Shreya Sarkar, who is the president and board chair at HRSF, a fellow IO for those in people analytics. So definitely been great to focus on AI, how AI comes along, and how do we as people practitioners really make sure that it's a people-centered implementation and really HR is leading a lot of the decisions as opposed to coming along or lagging behind. So it's been really exciting. And then we have folks like Alexis Fink and Alex Levinson, who are also part of the task force with HR Strategy Forum, really coming together, sharing practitioner perspective, academic perspective. So it's been really fun.
Yeah. Both of them are friends of the podcast, previous guests. Love that you shared that. Yeah. Well, you mentioned it kind of exists to help people get ahead. How do we get ahead right now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question and $1 million question. I think certainly a lot of things are evolving. It's understanding what are the questions at hand and what is it that we, as whether it's people analytics or HR practitioners, bring to the table, to the conversation. So one of the things that I feel very passionate about as a people analytics practitioner is how do we use people data for good? And with AI, all of this gets amplified, right? Like biases get amplified, bad data, you put AI on top of it, and we know what happens next, right? And so that's one lens. Then from HR standpoint, like if you are a chief HR officer or HR business partner, it's really an unprecedented time for influencing the organization to get it right from the people standpoint, not for just today, but for the organization in even like medium term, even if we're not talking long term. So a lot of business leaders are currently facing a lot of pressure with just competing, implementing AI, transforming their workforce. And it's sort of short-term decisions all over, regardless of the industry. It's just that business pressure, the time of change. And so as HR, as people analytics, we have tremendous opportunity and tremendous responsibility to help make sure the business is set up for success long-term. Because if you automate all of the, roles that more junior folks were taking in the organization, what happens to your pipeline? What happens to your business along the way, a few years from now? And so it's exciting to be in the position of being able to influence, being able to raise those hard questions. That's something that brings me a lot of energy.
Well, I know you were saying that rhetorically, and I've heard many people say it, and I've probably said it myself about like what happens if you kind of pull up the bottom rung of the ladder. But what happens? Like in your perspective, like what does happen if that actually happens to those junior people and to the organizations that don't have that talent pipeline for them anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot to figure out, a lot of unknowns, and I think also too, I am very cautious about or hesitant to kind of project what happens because there's just literally so many things changing. But I think one of the things that we've relied on for years, right, is building strong internal pipelines, making sure that we have that institutional knowledge in the organization to build up the teams, right? Like that's what a lot of the workforce planning, build, buy, borrow is based on. And so if you continue to be on that trajectory of having fewer and fewer people who are your internal pipeline, it presents all sorts of different risks to the organization. I know you have a lot of thoughts on that topic as well. I've
Do I?
been reading through the manifesto that you shared earlier, and I don't know if I'm out of turn, but I like to break rules at times.
There's
So,
no rules. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
okay, great. Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to turn that question back to you because I'm sure you have a hot take, and I am happy to indulge you in that.
Yeah, I mean, I've covered the manifesto a few times on here, so I'll try to cover some new ground if that's okay.
Sure. Yep.
Say something I haven't said, which is especially on the bottom rung of the ladder, there was a reason why organizations were pyramidal shaped. And it's because the bottom part of the pyramid is the widest, and it's the widest because it's the cheapest. And it's like organization, because we keep hearing about like diamond shaped organizations now. A diamond shaped organization is pretty expensive. And I think organizations are, because they're for whatever reason are temporarily forgetting that younger workers have like engagement and they want to learn and they and frank and maybe they need extra training and things like that, but they also are relatively cheap. And I think that is going to, in a very cost constrained environment, I think organizations are going to rediscover that, because it's always like the pendulum is swinging back and forth. And notice I haven't said anything at all about AI or people intelligence or anything like that. It's just, it's like we have to like rehash these arguments every few years, like every decade or so. We have to like forget, like, oh yeah, in 2009 we just won't hire younger people anymore, and then what will happen as a consequence? And then you go a few years and then organizations try to overcorrect because they didn't hire enough young people, and it's like this pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, and it's fundamentally a workforce planning problem. And so I don't know if that really gets at what you're talking about, but I just have a feeling we're gonna have to learn that lesson again, and I think it's silly.
Yeah, I mean, to build on that, completely agree with we're over rotating on a lot of
Mhm.
things, right? And I think it's kind of typical, right, at the time of change when we're trying to figure out how to do things differently. There tends to be going to extremes, right? You read about organizations, whether it's massive layoffs that are disguised under like, AI is improving
Yeah.
things. So, but I think there was one episode, not on this podcast, that you were speaking to that really resonated was the meme you were describing, I think, about the software and the junior software engineers and automating them
Mm,
with something
yeah.
with AI that, back to the cost picture. I think what's really interesting right now, a lot of organizations, especially in the early stages of AI adoption, they are not really looking at that cost as a comparison, right? Like the cost that you're spending on like how much it takes you with tokens to get this stuff
Mhm.
done with AI versus how much it like whether it really should be continue to be done by humans. So I absolutely agree with you. I think it will hit a lot of the organizations, and that's where I feel strongly that it's an amazing opportunity for HR to really like voice and articulate what will happen if there are not very intentional long-term decisions.
Absolutely. But really, really great points there, Sasha. I am curious, and this may seem tangential, but I think it's actually really related to what your work and why I think you're really good at what you do. You're writing a book on something not related to people analytics at all. Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, thank you, Cole. That's been really fun. I think I certainly am one of the folks with a very non-traditional career path to people analytics, and that's part of why it makes it fun. But for my master's and my doctorate, I studied communication, and the way I look at it is like communication is the flip side of IO in the sense that like how is reality constructed once it's communicated, and really a lot
Mhm.
of theories about reality being subjective reality in the kind of eye of the beholder, and your communication choices matter every step of the way. What you choose, how you choose to respond, how you choose to construct your narrative, it gets into influence and all sorts of things. So the book that I'm working on with my co-author, who also went to the same school for where I went for my master's. Um, it's really focusing on how do you understand communication principles if you didn't go to school in
Mhm.
communication. So many of us communicate every day, whether business leaders, HR leaders, and a lot of folks didn't go to school in communication, didn't have those principles. And with AI, once you use AI for everything, there is this notion of how do you evaluate quality if you don't have the expertise in it, right? And that's really what made me think about focusing on that. The idea here is like each chapter is designed to introduce academic principles about communication. So I definitely didn't want to focus on something that you just can put in AI and never learn about it. This kind of component of actually teaching folks in a very succinct way, but drawing on research. Because what good looks like, there's so many opinions now and there's very little credibility to it, right? AI can come across as very convincing and credible, and if you don't have the academic backing or background to evaluate, you're going to be fooled very easily. And so the idea here is that each chapter is summarizes the key principles that are academic driven and are research based about communication, and then it provides guidance on how you would use that effectively with AI. So there is a whole section of what you would include in AI instructions so that
Mhm.
you can partner with AI to ask you questions on things like audience analysis, expose the curse of knowledge, and things like that. So it's been really fun to focus on. It's hard to find time on top of day job, but it's been great. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well, first, I don't know. Do you have a title and a release date?
Uh, don't we're debating the title. Don't have the release date yet, but more to come. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when
Thank you.
Sasha's book comes out, make sure you go check it out, everybody. But
Thank you.
you mentioned the concept of audience analysis. What is that?
Yeah, it's I think this is like super important now more than ever. I see that a lot of times in my work in people analytics. It's very easy to assume that your audience is like one persona or maybe two personas and that they're the same, and they're not, right? Like even when you think about, like, I work very a lot with HR business partners, and it's such a wide spectrum about who your HR business partner persona is. And so if I am making assumptions about what people need to hear, what they need to know, that are based on like this limited understanding on the audience, my message is not going to land well. And also in the time, like with AI, I see lengthy things, a lot of communication. So like there's just a lot of noise. So being able to cut through the noise and land your message effectively by understanding your audience, it goes back to empathy. It goes back to being heard and seen, understanding who the audience is, what they care about. And I think in people analytics and also in a lot of the AI implementation in general, we see sometimes this notion of like, I've communicated it clearly, it's on them. And it's not. Communication is a two-way street. And if the message is not landing with your audience or particular segments of your audience, you have a lot to do with it, right? The ownership is not just on them, and the ownership is on you if you want to have that effective outcome.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. How does that help you as a people analytics business partner? And how does
Yeah.
that make you unique and different? And what can other people learn from that that would help them be more effective in that role as well?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Cole. The conversation that you and Alexis had on Directionally Correct a few podcasts ago, where she played the host, and there was a discussion about the importance of OD plus IO psychology. And I would also add communication and change management to it. And a lot of times OD has kind of those components in it. But this particular element, whether it's AI implementation, whether it's changes to the job, right? Like back to the manifesto and how the functions are collapsing, your jobs are changing, what you used to do, like all of that is tremendous change. And we need not pretend that it's a light switch, right? And I
Yeah.
think when people feel like they're already feeling like it's moving too fast.
Yeah.
And so when we don't acknowledge the human element, we don't acknowledge how much we're asking of employees. Essentially, we're asking folks to perform at the level that they're
Mhm.
performing or higher because we need to compete. And we're also asking them to learn new tools. We're asking them to think about how to change their job, where there might be even thinking like, is this going to then replace me? So that's kind of threat in the back of their mind. And so certainly as people analytics professionals and also HR professionals in general, leaning into that change management, communication, empathy, slowing down, understanding that we're talking to people. I think sometimes it's just very challenging because we're also under the pressure to move fast and show
Yeah.
impact. But I think it's one of those move slow and with intention to
Mhm.
get to the outcome. And also like related to that, this is the whole reason I'm in people analytics. It's all about the impact. It is not about doing cool stuff, although I love cool stuff and advanced analytics and being able to answer really challenging, hairy questions with data. But at the end of the day, if the business doesn't take it and apply it, it didn't matter. It's an overhead for the organization. You might have done cool stuff. And I think communication and change management is a lot to do with it because it's audience analysis. It's moving at the speed of the business because sometimes you can have great analysis, but the ship have sailed. They made the decision with the information that they had. And with AI, we have tremendous opportunity to help speed up those stages to get to those things faster, but it doesn't replace but only amplifies this human dimension and that judgment, that ability to understand, that ability to influence.
That's so wonderful. I'm thinking about this in terms of like, well, let me talk about the manifesto for a second since you brought it up.
Yeah.
You mentioned communication being important, and just because you communicate something doesn't mean somebody actually interpreted it that way. And then you said, it seems like things are moving fast, probably faster than people are comfortable with. That was actually one of the motivations for the manifesto. Is everybody's saying things are changing, things are changing, things are changing, but nobody was saying what they're changing from and what they're changing into. And here's the playbook from how to go from one to the other. And that's why I wrote the manifesto, because it was like, hey, here is what I'm seeing that's changing. Here I'm putting a trail of breadcrumbs as to where I see things are going. I'm not perfect at predicting the future, but I'm trying to build it, especially in terms of the work that we're doing at HR Bench. And that's the best I can do. And then, I'm probably, I don't know if I should mention this on the podcast, but I'm probably writing a book on the topic. I know I'm a sucker for punishment as well. This is my second one. But we'll see what happens, and it's all under that motivation of like, can you communicate this effectively to help people move from point A to point B so that they can be effective in their jobs? And then if they're effective in their jobs, that actually makes our whole field shine, because we look like the brilliant ones who are actually navigating the future head on rather than just reacting to it like many other disciplines are.
Great call outs, Cole, and I will be looking forward to reading that book. I also, reading the manifesto, what struck me is even you calling out how the concept from a year ago that you were very proud of and made a lot of sense is now being impacted by the change in the world. And I think that's also something that doesn't go unnoticed. And for me, it again amplifies the need to slow down in some of the places, right? I also think, like, I want to poke on something, like you mentioned that a lot of people analytics folks are thinking about it, but not voicing it. I think it's also a human element, right? Like, and I think as people think about it, it's back to that, like, do we want to create a sense of anxiety among the team, for example, right? If we are completely consistently talk about like, oh, the functions will collapse, like there is an identity element there. So I think certainly that human element, I also think it's certainly not going to happen over time. So that's also another component, right? Like it will happen over time. I do want to say on the record that I disagree with you that we will not build another dashboard. So I had to sneak that in.
It's not that you won't have to. It's not that you never will. It's that you won't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, I thought that there might be, and part of it also to manifesto and knowing you, it also the style is like you want to be a little provocative so that you can have a conversation. But certainly, I do think that the dashboards, the ability to kind of use tools to expedite a lot of the work, like this is certainly is here to stay. I do want to emphasize the importance, which I think doesn't get talked enough. Because it's not sexy and not very convenient for vendors to talk about, because there's not like a big sell on it, is data quality, data that just the challenges with the business process of how data gets created in people's space. That's going to be continuing a big focus, because again, to that point, you put AI on top of data that is not clean, data that's not good, and so I think that's also going to be a big focus for people analytics moving forward.
I actually think you're so right on the data point, and it's a really hard problem. Like it's an extremely hard problem, and I don't think anybody, like, I can't remember where I talked about it, but there's like, I call it like the existential problem of data quality. And I can't remember if it was on here or somebody else. I think it was actually somebody else's podcast where they had me as a guest. And I talked about the problem of zip codes. Like, imagine somebody just puts in the wrong zip code for their, like, where they live. Like, how do you know it's wrong? Like, and like, you could prompt them and be like, and if it's not 5 digits, maybe it's 6 digits. Like, okay, you can create some kind of mechanism. You can even have like the drop down of zip codes that show it might be the right zip code, but somebody might not look at it closely enough and still click the wrong one. Like at a certain point, you just have to accept that people are going to put wrong information in. And that's an existential problem, because it's only like, how many times are you supposed to prompt somebody or ping somebody, be like, hey, have you double checked your zip code? Have you double checked your zip code? Have you double checked your zip code? Like, at what point are you just pestering people, just trying to improve your data quality? And it really, and I know I'm beating on the zip code point, but it goes for every single data field we have, right? Is they all suffer from the same problem, which is like, what is ground truth?
Yep.
Right. And if there's a divergence between what people say is ground truth and actual ground truth, how do you adjudicate that? And that's a really big problem.
I agree with you. I would also build on it and expand, because a lot of the data is coming from even a business process that has to do with how people operate. Now that we're trying to move fast, now that there is a lot of disruption, like keeping up with that is very challenging. And a lot of times, who is responsible for data? Maybe people analytics. Are they responsible for the end-to-end process in creating each one data point? No, right? And also too, that's another element that I think will continue to be salient. The other point too is our current kind of ways we look at data, like, and processes too. A lot of the processes and mental models need to evolve, right?
Yeah.
Like your annual performance cycle no longer cuts it, because work is not happening that way. Even your hierarchies, right? If the teams are doing work not based on who they report to, but they are more small, agile, nimble, and like short term, kind of, we're going to galvanize around X. And our HRIS has them either by cost center or by reporting hierarchy. We're already behind. So there's a lot of opportunities. And I am certainly a data governance nerd, because I crave structure. But I think certainly that continues to be a big focus for, for us.
Well, it's funny. I love that. And I love that, like, that's part of your identity. And you mentioned earlier, one of the things that people are struggling with is like the identity changing in the
Yep.
field. And I actually had a guest a while back, Jay Van Bavel, which most people in people analytics don't know him, but he actually might be one of the most famous guests I've ever had on the podcast. And I brought him on just to talk about social identities and how they're changing. And so it didn't actually perform all that well compared to many episodes. But because the topic seems like not people analytics and the guest seems like not people analytics, but I actually brought him on just for that reason, is because I feel like our field is struggling with an identity problem. And I wanted to bring on a researcher who could talk about what does that look like and how do you kind of navigate that challenge. And frankly, I've gone through that myself. Like it's been a tough ride. And like some of the things I write and I put out there and some of the provocative stuff is just like my own personal therapy of like, how am I dealing with the fact that the world's changing around me and I want to have control over it, but I don't necessarily have 100% control over my own destiny. And I want to kind of like take back the reins if I can.
Yeah, I love that. I'll have to catch up on that episode because that certainly resonates. And I think for people analytics and for HR in general, there is certainly an opportunity to continue to zoom out and learn from other disciplines, especially as the world of work is evolving.
Absolutely. Well, I want to bring it back to what you're doing. Like, and I hate to go down just like such a simple level, but I think it'd actually be helpful. What does a people analytics business partner do? And what does good look like? And how do they play a role in shaping like how Adobe's people strategy is executed?
Yeah, absolutely. I love to talk to that. So my role at Adobe is in analytics business partnering. We've restructured the team maybe like a year and a half, couple of years ago, to have more in like those domains of expertise. So we have BI team and reporting, research, data engineering, data science, workforce strategy, and then the analytics business partnering world is really more direct with HRBPs, with HRCOEs, with business leaders, and that's the space that I operate in. It's been a wild ride, a very exciting ride, because it gets me closer to understanding how people are experiencing what we're bringing, where it's meeting the mark and gets them excited, where maybe barrier to entry is a bit too high, where there's some friction, as well as also hearing what is emerging, what is the business focused on right now. And that's and as an analytics business partner, being able to then bring back to the people analytics team to say like, this number one thing that the business cares about right now, we need to pivot and we need to find ways to answer it and do it fast, because otherwise the ship will sail. I find that really exciting. And then vice versa, bringing the stuff that people analytics team works on back to the business and figuring out how to drive that impact. So we do, of course, the employee survey work. And so there is tremendous level of insights driven by data engineering, data science, research. And then how do you get leaders to not just engage to understand, but engage to take action and to make it visible to employees? Because what at Adobe, I've been very grateful. The culture is very data focused and very people centered. There's been places in the past in my career where it maybe hasn't been like that. And I've also worked not only internally in-house, but also as a consultant. And so coming in and trying to explain why people data matters and explain why you should care about employees, that's a very different conversation to have versus like, this is what we've seen in the data. And so I get very energized from that work, the fact that there is a lot of interest in understanding whether it's employee sentiment and what do employees care about and where the hotspots are. But I think there's also a lot of opportunities to make sure that the people analytics is operating at the speed of the business, and that's a century-old problem. And so again, it gives me a lot of energy. I think what to learn from it, I observe the opportunities to speak the same language. That's why audience analysis is really important, because the way you engage with an HR business partner who is like a savvy user of data and they don't need much support versus somebody who is just early starting with it and maybe is not as familiar, it's a very different dynamic, right? And some of the great learnings from my work at Adobe has been really leveraging HR business partners who are more kind of excited and engaged and like more technical and data savvy to not only give us not only like champions. I think like the idea of champions is pretty traditional, right? Like you build something and then you engage folks a little bit earlier, but to actually co-create. So we've done that, and that's been like really successful because we're getting very direct user input. And what struck me is sometimes the things that people care about are actually very easy to fix in the tool. So it's just giving us very direct lens of what's important to both the user as well as the business versus us assuming that we know it because we're also in HR and we work with those folks every day.
Absolutely. How do you navigate? I feel like this is the hardest problem with being a business partner. How do you navigate the subject matter expertise part of it, which is you have to be in the data and in the products that you guys have and in the just the analytical techniques, the sophistication, all of that to frankly deal with challenges that come from your customers. But you also have to know the business, have to have earned the trust, have to speak the language, have to communicate effectively, and be kind of that true business partner enough that you're actually can influence decision making. How do you do that? Like what? I mean, I know I'm probably asking a terribly formed question, but I feel like that's a really big problem.
It's really fun. I think this is one of the things that like gets me really excited. Again, it's understanding I think you talked about that. Did you call it translator in one of your writings?
I've used a variety of terms, but
Yeah,
yeah.
so it's kind of that like you essentially live in both worlds in order to be effective, right? Because you have the luxury of spending the time with the business to understand not only what keeps them up at night, but what hypotheses they have about what keeps them up at night, what assumptions they have. You also spend time asking questions, observing. It's kind of almost like an ethnography, but much quicker, very, very fast. Because you're making all of this, like you're constructing the reality that the business has, and then you going back to the people analytics and distilling that into something that your data science team or your research team can help with. And then you're taking this like complex, robust analytical product and figuring out how to communicate a few things that will land really well and in the language that the business is talking about. You leave out a lot of the sound stuff that is very important from the analytical rigor perspective, because you have the trust of your business partners, of your business leaders, that you know this stuff that they need, and you can bring it up, right? Like if they ask a question and want to go into a rabbit hole on something, you're happily do that. But that's the magic of it. I think to me, what energizes me is that it's a lot of complexity, it's a lot of judgment, it's a lot of reading the room, it's a lot of understanding what is unspoken, and then being able to then translate it into something very clear, take into account what data we have, because a lot of questions we can't solve because the data is just not there to be able to answer it in the way that is required. So those are some of the things that I find most energizing and kind of been exciting and impactful.
I mean, you've been kind of famous in your own right, correct? You were on TV in the past, weren't you?
Uh, a little bit.
Care to tell us about it?
I think you're talking more about, like, let me frame it this way. I'll share about my untraditional career path. So my first job was a cow herd. So it's like a shepherd, but for a cow. I think I was 8 or 9 years old. And I had a responsibility for one cow because the cow was too young to be able to join the big herd. And so I had to get up early, I had to be on time, and I had to not lose the cow because that would be a big deal. And so shepherding or cow herding early on in my life taught me a lot of just responsibility. I was paid in milk. It was the best milk I've ever had in my life. You know, when you buy the whole milk here in the store, it's just nothing compared to that. Like the layer of cream on the fresh cow milk from the cow that you herded is very, very satisfying. And then the other detour that is very unconventional was modeling, which taught me a lot of confidence because you had to be confident no matter what. It also made me realize that there's other things I could be doing in life. I had all these ideas and contributions, and they're like, no, just smile, please. So that was another interesting experience. I think also too, what it taught me is what a career is from, like, the perspective you have from the outside is very different a lot of times than the reality of it. Like the glamorous part is pretty short, and there is a lot of just work that is not glamorous. And so definitely for those who are starting their careers, ask people who are in the role what are some of the things that they do as part of their career that is maybe not as fun.
I had to ask. I mean, which one's less glamorous, cow herding or modeling?
I enjoyed cow herding a lot more, actually, because I guess with modeling, maybe there was a little more disillusioning. With cow herding, it just kind of feels pretty straightforward. You're out there with but yeah, comparison we don't speak of very often, cow herding or modeling. There might be a need for a research project there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you want to join me in Cole's Corner?
I am very excited about the articles. So
Okay.
yes, please.
Welcome to Cole's Corner. Well, before we get to the articles, we got some rapid fire.
Okay.
And one of them is related to what we were just talking about. So if you weren't in people analytics or being a model or being a cow herder, what would you have done with your career?
I'm really interested in just HR in general. Like, I think it's one of the things that is like very appealing, HR or business in general, because again, to me, and it also speaks to kind of how the roles evolve. There may be more of the kind of merge between the domains of people analytics, and there are some HR business partners who come from more analytical background, HR senior leaders. So that's a track that is of interest. I also have a lot of hobbies. I love plants, so I my latest has been to help orchids rebloom again, and
Mhm.
that's been very satisfying because a lot of times you buy an orchid, they look great, and then so
Yeah,
that could be another thing
I
I
love
could
it.
on.
You've got a lot of curiosities, a lot of hobbies. I love it.
Yeah.
What's the place you've never been to that you most like to go and why?
Um, Dominican Republic, and we have a trip planned later this year. Just heard a lot of great things and very excited. I love the kind of cultural experiences. My husband and I, and we have a daughter who is 5, so we travel quite a lot. My daughter, I think, has been in 7 countries before she turned 5, so it's always really exciting to see the world through her eyes because it's like all new. Costa Rica is another country that's on my list there to visit. So
Yeah, I got to speak at a conference down there earlier this year. It was awesome.
I've heard about that. Yeah, that's great.
That was super
You'll
cool.
have to
It's like so
travel now.
tickled to be down there. Um, if you were a character in any book, TV show, or movie, who would you be and why?
I would be a superhero because it would be really cool to have some skills and competencies that I don't have today, and to do good things with it. Like, it's just like a very logical
But
transition.
which superhero? You have to choose one.
I'm not very versed in superheroes. I don't watch much TV because I always have projects that I could be doing myself.
Well,
So
then what's the superpower you would have?
I would fly. I
Okay,
would be
fly.
able to see things that I don't see. So yeah, those two.
All right, I love it. So I've got one big question for you before we move into the what am I reading section, and it's about the future of business partnering in people analytics, but in HR more broadly. What do you think? Like, if you looked 3 years into the future, how will your role change, and what will it look like?
As in people analytics or HR business partnering? Just
Um, well, the comment both. Let's
okay.
or
Um,
either.
I think certainly, we see a lot of like, I agree with you on the manifesto side about, the roles are merging, right? We see that in the business, we see that in people analytics. What you had to have a specialized, maybe engineering skill set or a technical skill
Mhm.
set before, now you could use AI for a lot of it. So I think certainly the ability and hopefully the ability to answer questions faster, right? Because you just have tools at your fingertips and you're not relying as much on, working with other teams to get you something that is like analysis, etc. I think just ability to move faster. I think there'll be more, certainly AI native is an element, right? Like being able to have AI in every part of your job, but also integrating in such a way that you still have the human element there and you retain the excitement. I have to quickly reference one of the folks that is a influencer in and teacher. It's I'm gonna have to come back with a name. It's Dave, I think. But anyway, he was talking. He came to do an AI day at Adobe, and it really resonated. For the first time I heard someone in the AI training really talk about how to think about tasks to automate in a way to not take out what brings you joy. And I
Mhm.
think that's really important. So I think like that future of the profession, whether it's analytics business partnering, people analytics in general, or HR roles, it's making sure that you are augmented with AI, but in a
Yeah.
way that you continue to have deep satisfaction versus you're feeling threatened that like, what is it that I'm doing here? So I think
Yeah.
that will be a big element there. And I think also too, we're also seeing this trajectory where AI is bringing value, but that desire to have human connection, that desire to
Mhm.
have human judgment, somebody who's actually an expert and not just read something that AI put together, I think that will be amplified. That's just my take.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we've talked about it a few times, but Stacia and Danny from Red Thread came on and talked about the concept of hollowed out expert being a problem of the future. Like, how do you even know if somebody's really an
Right.
expert if everybody sounds like they're an expert?
Yeah.
But the other thing you were saying about, I guess, the guy named David or whatever
Yeah,
that
it's
came to speak at Adobe.
Bears.
Um,
Dave Bears from the Gen AI Academy, and
okay.
he's based in England, and I highly recommend because it's like that human centeredness.
hmm Well, I keep saying, like, don't build a future you don't want to live in. And for whatever reason, like, I find when people are experimenting with automation, for whatever reason, they always start with like their favorite part of the job first.
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
so dumb. It's
Yeah.
like automate the thing you hate doing. Why?
Exactly. Yeah, you talked about it for calendaring, right? In one of your
Yeah.
podcasts, like automate stuff, make it fun. I don't like doing status updates. And when we introduce some automations in there, I'm like, oh, I actually could do that. Like it's the
Yeah.
part I dreaded the most.
But it's like, it's almost like there's like this, I don't know, Icarus type moment or Frankenstein type moment where we like have to, as humans, be like, can this do my job better than me? Can it
Mhm.
do everything I can do? So let's see if I can try out the thing that I think I'm the best at first. And it's like this weird, like psychosocial thing that we have. And like we just have to try. It's like, stop it. Just go do the thing you hate doing. Like,
Right.
why?
And figure out how to make yourself faster, right? Like take
Yeah.
out parts of the work so that you can deliver more faster with and retain that excitement. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
Well, let's get into the what am I reading? I have a feeling you're excited to talk about one of these articles.
I am excited to talk about all of them. So yeah, you go your intro and then yeah,
All right,
go
let me
ahead.
get down to it. So, one of the things that I've covered probably ever since the podcast started is just people talk about bias a lot. And one bias that I think is particularly pernicious and no one talks about. And I found an article from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. It came out last year called Social Bias Blind Spots. Attractiveness bias is seemingly tolerated because people fail to notice the bias. And I'll say this about it was a really well written abstract. And so I'm just going to read it as is because most abstracts are not as you can't understand them most of the time, but this is a good one. It says discrimination remains a key challenge for social equity. A prerequisite for effective individual and societal responses to discrimination is that instances of it are detected. Yet prejudice and discrimination are rarely directly observable, and the presence of discrimination has to be inferred by circumstantial evidence, such as over or overrepresentation of certain individuals. Here, we study how people judge the outcomes of statistically biased samples along different dimensions. And they use 6 different studies. So I'm going to skip down here a little bit. But basically, they look at gender biases, race biases, and then attractiveness biases. And the funny thing that they find is if people find bias for gender or race, they say it's like, okay, this may exist, but it's bad. However, if people find bias associated with attractiveness, they recognize that it exists, but they're like, they say it's more likely to go undetected. Our findings suggest that seeming tolerance of attractiveness biased outcomes is partly explained by people's failure to spontaneously notice that the outcome is attractiveness biased in the first place. In other words, it is possible that people showed muted responses to biased outcome because they are not actually they actually approve of it because they fail to notice the bias in the first place. What do you
Yeah, I
think
have
of this,
so
Sasha?
many thoughts. I mean, do you want to share your thoughts first, or do you want me to
Oh,
go?
I want to because I just talk for a long time.
All right.
So, what are your
So
thoughts? And I'll share mine.
I think a couple of thoughts come to mind. Definitely that point of not being recognized. And I see a lot of parallels with different types of biases in the data, especially if you put AI on top of it. So back to your zip code example, right?
Mhm.
Like there's a lot of things that are not culturally known as in the same way as like the other protected characteristics bias, right? They're not part of the vernacular, they're not part of the culturally known and kind of accepted set of biases that we as a culture globally think of as bad. And so when biases go unnoticed, there is a big danger of them being perpetuated because we don't test for them a lot of times, right? Yet with AI, it can be amplified a lot more. And so I think that's one element. The other element that I think is very salient and very dangerous is that if you look at how attractiveness bias is perpetuated by large like just AI models, right?
Mhm.
When because that bias exists, it goes unnoticed. You can
Try to
see
get AI to show you an ugly person when they
exactly.
generate it
Yeah.
from scratch. It does
No,
not exist.
absolutely. And there's an article I was reading as I was nerding out on kind of additional things related to this. Like there was a test actually with AI looking at pictures and trying to assign a characteristic like a profession or whether the person is confident or insecure. And they took a set of normal human pictures and then they put a beauty filter on top of them. And guess
Mhm.
what AI coded? AI consistently, persistently coded the folks who were beautified as more confident, more rich, more in like successful careers. So it's already here, it's everywhere, and it's also something that humans have not established as a kind of set bias that we test for. So I think, like, to me, there is a lot of hard implications of that.
Yeah. You know, Mark Andreessen, who's a famous kind of venture capitalist, he wrote something pretty provocative a few months ago, and it was like, "There's only going to be 4 jobs in the future," and I can't remember 2 of them, but one of them was like engineers and product people, and like any kind of scientists are all going to be combined into one.
Yeah.
And then he said the fourth category is hot people, and hot people are going to do all the interpersonal jobs. And I just keep thinking about this as like it's so out in the open, this attractiveness bias, that we're just like going to call it a whole job category in the future. And people are just going to accept it like that is a proxy for competence, which it is not. It's
No.
a huge bias. And I do not understand why people tolerate it. It makes no sense.
Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's certainly an area that needs attention, and especially with kind of the evolution of things and with AI exacerbating this.
I always try to bring on a research topic related to something that our guests are uniquely qualified to talk about. So, as a prior model, I appreciate you suffering through this
Yeah.
with me and talking about my personal access to grind. Do you
I
want
really
to talk about the
want
next
to talk
one?
about the second article.
Okay,
Um,
because this
so
is also an interesting one.
this one
Um,
is yeah, I have a lot of personal experience to share.
and so, and this is actually Jay Van Babel of all people. The he found this on LinkedIn, but it's from a research article in Psychological Science called "The Long Reach of One's Spouse: Spouse's Personality Influences Occupational Success." And so he says, pick your relationships wisely. For both men and women, their partner's conscientiousness predicted their own future job satisfaction, income, and likelihood of promotion, even after accounting for their own conscientiousness. Why? Because conscientious partners, both men and women, perform more household tasks, exhibit more pragmatic behaviors that their spouses are likely to emulate, and promote more satisfying home life, enabling their spouses to focus more on work. What do you think about this one, Sasha?
I loved reading this. So I got the full article and I nerded out on their methods section. I absolutely love that they studied the idea of delegation, the whole notion of like if your spouse is conscientious, you could delegate more things, right? You could feel like, I trust this to be done. I don't need to be worried about it. I also really liked the gender balance on that, because there were citations about like behind every man there is a great woman, right? Behind every great man. So they flipped it over on the other side as like behind every person there's a great spouse. uh,
Yeah.
so I have a lot of personal experience. So my husband and I are both extremely conscientious to the point of being nerdy and very boring. And so I just personally can relate, like the times when he is on travel and I have to manage it all, childcare responsibilities, etc. It's very stressful and I am not as productive. I get less sleep because there's just more to worry about. And the times when he is here and his normal self, there is, this sense that you could trust to have this whole dimension of things be taken care of by someone else who will do a good job. I think it removes a lot of stress. It allows you to focus on work. It makes you more productive at work because you're not mentally kind of checking off your list. So I loved reading this article, and shout out to Edgar.
I love it. Yeah, though I guess the only PSA I'll make, because I agree with everything you said, is there's been all this stuff coming out lately about how like people aren't coupling anymore, and people are having less babies, and like the population is about to like burst and all this kind of stuff. And the thing I just say is, go get married, go have some kids, but just make sure you find a conscientious mate before you do, because then everything's going to be much easier on the back end.
That's a good plug. And I think also too, that's what the LinkedIn post was about. Like, think about the priorities, because you want somebody who's agreeable, etc. But it's the conscientious. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's do the last one real quick. This is from, and I made a post a while back asking people for like recommendations of smart people that they follow, and somebody recommended Sanjeev, who writes this Substack called the Work Design Lab, and it's been fascinating. I've been following it. It's doing a really great job. He made this post called "Finance Got There First." Anthropic CFO Krishna Rao is no longer running backwards-looking meetings. The architecture that made that possible isn't proprietary. HR just hasn't built it yet. And so he goes through all these examples from Anthropic about how their finance team actually built, I think it's something like 70 something skills in Claude that allow them to automate essentially all of the things that a traditional like finance meeting would need to do kind of backwards looking analysis. And so they get to spend all their time looking at forward looking metrics rather than this backward looking, very manual way that most teams do things. And so he gives a few examples of how HR could adopt a similar mindset. Tool number one is the HRIS MCP, which the tool number two is the comp planning dashboard. Tool number three is the talent signal internal mobility layer. Tool number four is the HR variance analysis. And then he talked about how you can just do this all yourself. You don't necessarily need any external tools, but you got to make sure you get your architecture correct and all that type of stuff. But I thought this was extremely provocative. And I tried to imagine what it would be like to have an HR leadership team meeting and it only be forward looking in nature and not backward looking. And just that in itself, even technology aside, that in itself would be quite radical. And I know you probably are in a lot of those types of meetings, not just in HR, but with the parts of the business you support. And so I was very curious, what did you think about this one, Sasha? And how could you see this, manifesting itself in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things about the architectural setup and the infrastructure, those are the focus for a lot of people analytics professionals, right? Like taking advantage of like even the data layer, the insights layer, how you deploy it, right, is also a question. In addition to like forward looking, I also think it's very important to continue to bring in the impact of people analytics. It's traditionally been very hard to measure because you give leaders an analysis, it really resonates, they go in, they make decisions, and very infrequently do you go back and check like what exactly difference that it made. So I think that's certainly one layer. I do see that in the business conversations, there's a lot of focus on what it will be in the future, right? And what do we know from today? Like they don't want to hear about what happened. They want to hear about what to do next, right? So I think all of this certainly resonates. And I also do feel like it builds on the curve of credibility. Before somebody listens to you about predictions of the future, you need to build credibility about kind of the work you're doing day to day. But it resonates, certainly resonates.
Absolutely. The one statement that I'll make is, I think this is actually even more relevant for finance than even for HR, but it's putting a lot of trust into your own internal build applications. Yeah. And making sure there's no like AI drift that happens from when you build it to in the future. And I don't know if I'd want to do that with my company finances, frankly, yet. And so in your HR measures to boot. And so I don't know. It is pretty radical. I love the ideas, and he kind of gives examples of like how you would build this yourself. I'd say you better test and double test and triple test and quadruple test and make sure all of this is correct before you put it out there, because there is I can't remember where I saw it, but somebody said something the other day which was like, um, if you're doing things that are deterministic in nature, like they're actually like a fact and the fact never changes, you probably should be using traditional software. And if you're doing things that are probabilistic and making projections and needing to combine multiple ideas, and it's okay if not being 100% correct every time is okay, you should probably be using some kind of AI tool. And so the most important thing to know is your outcome deterministic or non-deterministic? Not should you be using AI or not using AI? And I think some of these things, especially in finance and especially in HR, when it's just a set of facts, that you should probably be using more deterministic things in those cases.
I do feel like there is this caveat also. It's Anthropic who's talking about their own tools, right?
It's them talking their book. Yes.
Right. Versus really, who out of any other organization really would, it's using your own product. So it's kind of that element, versus being a universally, this is what you do. And I think it's also back to data quality, back to setting up all of the parameters in the way that actually is sound from like solid competency perspective. And as you said, like the review before it lands. I find that a lot of times in these publications and articles that position something as like revolutionary or groundbreaking, there's a lot of context that's left out, right? About the parts that actually it takes to get there.
Well, and this is why I read a lot of this stuff, is because it's fun to experiment. It's fun to build an HRIS MCP. It's fun to try to see if you can automate your HR variance analysis. Like all this stuff is like super fun. The question is it right? And is it right every time? And those are different things. Like and so I totally agree with what you're saying. But Sasha, you've been a fantastic guest to have on. I've been looking forward to this for a while. So thank you so much for bearing with me going through some of this stuff. But if anybody wants to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a good place. I also would love to. So Sasha Arjannikova, there is not another one like that in people analytics. So
boom.
and then I would love to invite everybody to the next AI collab, because we have one session in September. We also have a session with Alec Levinson as a thought leader. So certainly it's HRSF AI collaboratory, and so definitely would love to see more practitioners from people analytics space, from HR space, because the quality of conversation depends on who is in the room. So
well, and that's part of the HR strategy forum, correct?
Yes.
And if people, and is that open to anybody, or who can attend?
Yeah, so the target audience is really HR practitioners, but we also have folks who are maybe in transformation role or in IT role that is part of like AI implementation in organizations, because in a lot of companies it doesn't necessarily sit in HR. And so yeah.
All right, well, check out the HR strategy forum and some of the upcoming sessions, and look up Sasha on LinkedIn and all the good things. But you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Sasha. I'm not going to try to pronounce her last name. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Cole. Appreciate it.